Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Timeless. So in this episode, we had a team going back to 1882, around the time of Jesse James, in particular, like around the day that he's supposed to die, but Flynn changed that and saved his life. Which, interestingly enough, like the people that were kind of his associates, they kind of set him up. So basically, like, oh, we're going to go in this job, but the moment his back is turned, they both shoot him. I mean, obviously not in the episode because, you know, Flynn ended up saving him, but history-wise, that's how he went down. And something that does make me wonder, because the reason why they did it was because they were contacted by the authorities and like, hey, we'll pardon your crimes if you kill Jesse James. And I haven't looked it up, so it's something I'll have to look up later. I'm very curious to know if in history they actually got pardoned, or did the authority be like, no, you're criminal. If you thought we were actually going to really work with you, you're done. I arrested them or hung them or whatever the case may be. Anyway, but in this episode, you know, Flynn ends up saving Jesse James' life for a particular reason, because basically he needs to track down someone, but basically it's on native land. And that would mean, you know, he needs a gunslinger on his side, someone who's very good, just to kind of have his back in this whole situation. Which, interestingly enough, I'm not that familiar with Jesse James. I've, you know, his stuff here and there, but I did not realize. I guess it kind of makes sense that he's as conceited as he is. Like, when he was in the bar, the lady recognized him, he didn't do anything. Normally, you're a criminal, you kind of want to lay low, but for him, he enjoyed it. It was just like, yeah, I want as much attention as possible. It ends up getting some U.S. Marshals involved, and he ends up killing them. And he's like, he even goes as far as saying, like, well, at least they saw something pretty before they died. And referring to himself as like, how much of a douchebag are you? Like, he's so conceited, because because for him, it's just like he loves the attention. Like, it kind of coincides with something he said with Flynn, like a conversation he had about, like, hey, like, Flynn, you know, saying that he's doing all this for a cause. And then, you know, using himself as an example, Jesse's like, yeah, I was kind of like that too. I was in the army. I killed a lot of people for the cause that I fought for, but my side ended up losing, and I kind of ended up with nothing. And then I started realizing that, eventually he kept killing, because killing was his main reason. Like, his cause was the main reason why he killed. But after losing that cause, he still kept killing. And he's like, you know why? It's because I found out that I enjoyed it. I like killing, and that basically I just needed an excuse to do it. And essentially, he was saying, like, hey, Flynn's the exact same way. He can put all these pretenses up of being like, oh, he's doing this for a good reason. At the end of the day, he's killing people because he likes it, and he just needs an excuse to do it. So I'm thinking that's another reason why Jesse is conceited the way he is, wanted to get a lot of people's attention, is because he wants to because he wants to prove he's the best, that no one can stop him, that he is the greatest type of thing, kind of, that basically in layman's terms, he's a legend, he's the best around. So it was just kind of interesting seeing that conceited mentality from, like I said, that's a historical figure I know very little about, so it's kind of interesting seeing that depiction of him. I'm sure, like, I wouldn't be surprised if he really was like that back in the day, because it's like, when you're good, when you start thinking like that, like, have that mentality, it's like you're going to get egotistical and just very narcissistic, you know. So, but in this episode, to track him down, Flynn and Jesse, the team joins forces with a guy named Baz, who is basically the lawman that the Lone Ranger is based on. And then, like, because, you know, Rufus is like, well, why don't I really know about this guy at all? And he ends up finding out, it's like, oh, because Baz, the guy that the Lone Ranger is based off, is black. So it's like, of course, he wouldn't get the notoriety he deserves for being a good person, like, good at his job. Which, at the end of the day, he's like, he doesn't do it for anyone else. It's not about, like, doing it for, like, oh, you know, anyone of his, you know, like, anyone black, because later on in the episode, Rufus is like, oh, you got to tell your story, not just, you know, for also the people, you know, so that everyone will know, get the story straight in the future, kind of like a step forward for black people. But for him, he's like, I'm not doing this for anyone else. I'm not doing it for him. He's doing it for himself, because he's doing it because he believes in the law. Because that was something else Rufus brought up. It's like, how can you work for the law? Because that means kind of working with the men who were not too long ago enslaving you. And he's like, for him, he's like, yeah, the law isn't perfect, but if we don't have the law, what do we have? You know, chaos. You know, it's like, he lives and abides by that law. He has his own morals, and it coincides with the law. It's like, oh, this is the law, this is the way things are, and you have to follow the law. So, So for him, it's all about doing that job, you know? I guess because the way he was having that conversation with Wyatt about, like, kind of like, oh, you can't just go off killing people. Like, he's killed some people in his day. So it seems like, obviously, you know, for him, it's just kind of a means of, I guess, a sort of making up for the past of being on a straight and narrow. It's like, yeah, I made that mistakes in the past of killing people. It's like, but you can't go through life just killing everyone just because it suits your needs. Law is there for a reason to kind of keep us from going crazy. There's order that has to be followed, and it's like, you know, that's the right path to follow. Because the conversation came up about the fact that Wyatt wanted to kill Jesse James because it's like he's a bad guy. He's already killed a lot of people. I mean, in Wyatt's mind, it's like he's already supposed to be dead anyway. So it's like me killing him is just correcting the time. I mean, which at the same time you could argue is like, well, that's a little hypocritical of you because it's like you want to save your wife. You're upset about your wife dying, and it's like, oh, that's kind of part of the timeline. But the same thing could be said about Jesse. But the difference is like Jesse's a full-blown killer. If he was someone else, you know, it'd be a different story. But the fact is that he is who he is, which it's a justifiable reason to be like, yeah, he needs to die because he's killing a lot of people and he's supposed to be dead anyway. But like I said, you can, if you read between the lines, you can like, oh, that's a little hypocritical, don't you think? But it's the type of hypocrisy even I can get behind. It's like he's a bad guy. He's hurting a lot of people. And he does it so relentlessly, like pow, 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 like it's nothing. He loves it. He enjoys it. So it makes you wonder because of that conversation, because even when Jesse was like, yeah, like Flynn, when that time comes that your calls leaves you and, you know, you kind of, you know, fate kind of takes that calls away from you. I want you to come kind of look me up. So it's kind of like, it makes you wonder will Flynn kind of be questioning himself going forward or not. It seems like you can see it a little bit in his eyes that he is questioning it, especially because he ended up giving Jesse the rifle, which is kind of like the biggest mistake he could have done. It's like he's talking about the fact is that, warning them about the people that were following him, obviously the team as well as Baz, who also had his partner, who the character Tonto in the Lone Ranger is based around, which apparently I didn't know that Tonto is Spanish for fool. That was kind of interesting learning like that, because I love what Rufus is being like, man, the fact is, like, whoever came up with the Lone Ranger was a complete idiot. Why would you even name him that? It was interesting because the actor who plays Grant is Matthias from Longmire. I was like, I just, you know, I have just, you know, my acting moments. But it was just bringing up that question, like mainly Wyatt was feeling like this, like, because Wyatt has a different mentality from most people, and I think that's what Baz was kind of able to see in him, because he realized it's like, oh, you've killed some people in the past, like probably knowing, like probably in some shape or form, probably filling out that Wyatt was a soldier, and it's like because of that being a soldier, he has a different mentality. He ends up having a conversation with Rufus later on in the episode about that, being like, he, in his beginning, was like, oh yeah, like he had a clear-cut picture of good and bad, and being like, oh yeah, it's this and versus that, and you know, what makes a good person, what makes a bad person. It's like, because he used to love westerns and stuff like that, and in westerns is a clear-cut good guy, and it's like, oh, they were always in the right. But when he was, you know, in the military, he came to realize that like there's such a gray area. There's no, like, because it's a conversation that kind of pops up with Lucy too. It's like, how can we really say that Flynn's in the wrong when it comes to this whole situation of right versus wrong? It's like Rittenhouse, as we've seen and learned, Rittenhouse is as terrible as he says. So it's like, are we to really say that Flynn's 100% in the wrong in this situation? And for her, like Lucy, it's like because she ended up having that dream in her earlier at the beginning of the episode, and that's so heartbreaking because it's like, because all of it's derived from guilt, because she feels like all this time she hasn't done it. She feels like she hasn't really done everything she can to get her sister back. Plus, she ended up forgetting her sister's birthday. And it's like, that's a heavy burden to handle, because it's like, she's the only person who knows her sister ever existed. And it's like, you forget her birthday. And it's like, slowly but surely, it's like, because if you forget, it's like she never existed to begin with. Like, to everyone else, it's already like that. And if you, the last person who knows that she existed, don't know she existed, then she completely disappears forever. There's not even a bit of her left, and it's sad to forget someone that's your sister, someone that you love and hold so dear, to like forget them like that. So that's a heavy burden to be the only one that remembers her. I mean, fortunately, granted she has Wyatt and Rufus too, but still, even then, it's like she's the only one that has, yeah, like they know about Amy through Lucy, but it's like Lucy's the only one that lived her entire life, you know, with Amy as a sister, knows all there is to know about her. So it's like she's the only one who knows Amy. So, you know, and then like, you know, for Wyatt, his reasoning for being the way he is because it's like he met his wife's murderer, and the guy, I don't know. It's hard to really say whether the guy's really like being like, oh, sorry. He's like, if he could go back, he could. But he's like, but there's neither one of you and I, neither you nor I could say. So it's not like he was actively trying to push Wyatt's buttons, but it's hard to say like whether he enjoyed what he did, because you end up finding out from Wyatt that he also killed 2 other women too, which certain things start flowing through my head. I don't think I ever came up with it before, but it's like something I was randomly thinking, like, well, what if we end up finding out that him targeting Wyatt's wife, like he was already a killer, like maybe he was already a serial killer, like different people, and maybe he killed Jessica specifically because he was hired to, that Wyatt's wife was targeted. Because I was thinking, I was like, what was, like, because Wyatt never asked why. That's like the number one question. I would have asked why, but he never asked why. And I guess because to him, it was just kind of a random act, you know, the randomness of life. But it's like, no, like, because the thing is too, I'm very interested to find out, like, who are those other 2 women? Is it a situation like Jessica ended up fitting the type of woman he was trying to kill? I get the feeling, you know, just randomly thinking, like, maybe she was specifically targeted. But when it all came down to it, with the whole Jesse situation, Wyatt was like, no, we got to put him down. He's a bad guy. But then you have Baz being like, no, you can't do that. We got to take him in, be lawful. And like, I was actually shocked at how that turned out, with it Lucy being the one to kill him. And surprisingly enough, shooting him in his back. I guess it's like technically fixing history to a certain, that's originally how he died. But for Baz, it was kind of like, no, he's an unarmed man. You know, he's wounded and he's surrendering. So you can't do that. That's wrong. He's like, we need to go about this the right way. Like, I would, like, literally, Lucy shooting him, I didn't see that coming, because I was expecting, like, okay, Wyatt would put his gun down and then Baz would shoot him. But it's like, no, Baz wouldn't have done it just because of his reaction later on from things happening like that. So I was like so sure. I was like, oh man, he's going to tell Wyatt to put his gun down and then he's going to shoot him, you know, for Grant dying. So, because even Grant himself said it, like, Grant never felt like, because he's mixed, he's like a little black, little white, little Native American, but it was like he never really fit anywhere. He never had any real place to call home, and the only place he had was with Baz. It's the only place he felt like he fitted. I do love that conversation him and Rufus had earlier in the episode. Rufus like, oh, you're gonna track the horse footprints, and he's like, oh yeah, follow some broken twigs and call to the spirits. And Rufus like, really? He's like, no. We're going to talk to some witnesses, get their statements, because we're lawmen, and that's how you do it. And it's like, yeah. Once again, just biting off of, I love that that's how things work. I mean, it makes sense, because it's like history is one thing, and then you kind of get your history and your thoughts about history kind of warped, because it's like, especially because it's like you base everything off of a movie. You know, it's kind of like, oh, because of the Lone Ranger and stuff like that, you're kind of like, oh, that's obviously, well, movie, TV show, but it's like, you take that information, you're like, oh, obviously that fits too. It had to be based on something too. It's like, no, it's been warped for entertainment purposes. So, but we ended up finding out Flynn's real motives in this episode. I thought the person who shot down, obviously it's someone connected to Rittenhouse. Technically it was. We ended up finding out it's a lady named Emma. I need to learn that actress's name. I've seen her in plenty of stuff. The most recent thing, obviously, being on The Vampire Diaries, she played Lily Salvatore. I always struggle with the Salvatore last name. I just always say it weird. But yeah, like Emma is basically one of the pilots for the lifeboat. Her and Anthony were in it together. Like, they were the ones that kind of took the first trip together. But she ended up faking her death because she kind of got caught up in the Rittenhouse situation. Also seemed like there might have been something between her and Mason. Maybe I was reading that wrong, but like the way they were hugging each other and everything, seems like there was something about that. Maybe that's why Mason got pulled into this. Well, they make it seem like Mason was the one that kind of pushed her in, because she probably introduced her to Rittenhouse. So he was probably already in that corner, because also he looked so broken up about her being in that situation. But Anthony essentially lied and was like, okay, Emma died, so. But she's been hiding out in the past the entire time, trying to stay hidden from Rittenhouse, because it's like they would come after her if they knew she was still alive. And Flynn is like, I know better than anyone about Rittenhouse. And she's like, no, you don't know anything. You think you know something, but no. Like, she's the only one that really knows Rittenhouse, because they told her to do a lot of things. Because she's the only person that's talking a lot that's been in Rittenhouse's circle of, like, the fact is that got direct orders from them and stuff like that. The only other person like that is Mason, but he's never really opened up about what they're really after and stuff like that. Like, she's the one that knows what Rittenhouse is really planning to do with the time machine. Like I said, my thought being like, hey, they're trying to like get Rittenhouse spread. Like obviously they're already all over the place in time, but they're trying to monopolize time of being like trying to make themselves like a superpower or something like that by being able to go wherever they want to in history and influencing it to put themselves in a better and better position with everything they changed in the past. But nevertheless, that was the whole thing of what they came back in time for. So I'm actually surprised that Rufus would actually tell Mason about like the whole, I mean, I understand Agent Christopher, but I'm surprised he would actually tell Mason, because of like Mason really kicked at the D-bag in this episode. I figured he was going to choose Rittenhouse. I just because of just the nature, I was hoping he'd choose their side, but I had a feeling, I said it before, like he was just going to end up choosing Rittenhouse just because he's so afraid of his own life. He's like, you told me to choose a side, so I'm choosing one. Because basically he's getting Gia to train so that she can become the next pilot, so that like it's like, oh, Rufus would no longer be needed. So basically in about 6 months she'll become the new pilot and take over. That way Rufus will become expendable. He's like, so you better get back in line or things are going to be wrong. And he's like, why are you doing this? He's like, you told me to choose a side and I chose one. And it's like, it's sad that you chose the wrong side. You could have been working. The thing is, like, it's hard to say like what Mason is protecting, because when you look at things, it's like it's hard to say whether Mason actually has anyone he really cares about. Obviously, there's the whole Emma situation, but it's like even if that is a thing, he already thinks Emma's dead. So it's like, you know, this will be the time to fight for what's right, because the fact is they're very bad people doing very bad things throughout history. So it's kind of like, why not help them, stop them, especially because they put you in such a compromising position. But like to me, it makes it seem like Mason's only doing. Well, not just seem, but he actually is doing it for his own self-interest, his own self-survival, his own interest of, well, living. But still, it's like you're putting everyone else's lives in danger and making them do this whole Flynn thing. So it's like, so you're not willing to take the same risk that you're asking other people to take, you know? So, and even that conversation he had with Gia later on in the episode, being, because basically she hacked into the system and found out about, you know, Emma in particular, because he was like, oh yeah, the data about the other pilots, oh, that's all gone. And it's like, he was saying like, oh, the reason why I didn't tell you because I don't want you to be nervous or scared about going forward. But he's like, you know, in fact, she's like, I'm not scared. And he's like, yeah, but next time you kind of go behind my back and do something, he's like, you will learn what it is to be scared. It's like, man, he really stepped it up. And you got Rufus looking from far away, kind of gripping onto the bar and everything. And it's like, dude, like Mason really stepped it up. Now he's like, like I said, like at least in the beginning, I was like, okay, he was at least on Rufus's side. Even last episode, willing to help him and his family relocate. But it's like, he really wholeheartedly has joined Rittenhouse now. And it's just like, it's such a shame, dude. So he's like an obstacle. He's a bad guy that's in his way. So like, that's why I'm surprised, like, Rufus didn't really say anything to Agent Christopher. I mean, unless there's something that like he told her, but kind of off screen or something. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how that whole thing plays out with Emma and Flynn. Like, what exactly they're going to do. Like, you know, like I said, this entire time I've had my idea of what Rittenhouse is up to, and this time we'll hopefully get an actual answer to it. So, and plus Lucy having to struggle with this whole situation about her sister, it's sinking in more and more. Plus the fact that she has to live with what she did, because that was a conversation Rufus brought up too. It's like, ever since he killed that dude, at the time he felt like it was nothing, but now it's like it's eating away at him because it was so easy. It's like, should it really be that easy to kill someone? It's like, we're the good guys and it shouldn't be that easy, so let's not go out of our way to try and kill someone, you know. So plus the whole Gia situation too, like, I'm wondering whether Rufus would tell her everything, because I was thinking that this was what was going to happen. I thought Rufus was going to sabotage the experiments, I mean, you know, her trial runs, so that she wouldn't get better. And then she find out like, oh, Rufus, you're sabotaging me. Why are you doing that? She's like, oh, you think you don't want me to replace? I mean, granted, this could come up in the future, but it's like, oh, you don't want me to advance? Like, oh, you're afraid of me taking your job, and he can't really tell her the truth because he's afraid of getting her too involved, even though she's like kind of already teetering on being involved in this whole thing. So, a little slight side note, I do appreciate that there was that guy, what was his name, Sam, that she tricked into leaving so that she could look into the pilot recordings. I appreciate the fact that he was playing Infamous' second son. I don't know, it's just like, I love little things sprinkled into shows like that. I'm like, which I guess at the end of the day, like, I think that was probably on purpose, because, you know, Infamous has that whole, all the Infamous games have it, but not just, you know, not just Second Son, but the whole good karma versus bad karma. I guess it kind of fits, now that I'm thinking about it, with the tone of the show of like doing the right thing versus the bad thing, like what's good and what's bad, like upholding justice versus just kind of going anarchist and doing your own thing, like no matter what the cost. Even if you believe something is right, doesn't necessarily make it, just because, in Baz's words, just because it's easy doesn't make it right. So, and the final note of the episode we had was like Wyatt's coming to Rufus being like, hey, I want you to help me steal the time machine so we can go back and save my wife. And it's like, Rufus is like, I told you, man, I don't want to kill anybody. He's like, you're not going to have to do anything, Rufus. I just need your help. You're the only person I can turn to. And it's like, I'm like, literally the story like element I was like waiting for. I didn't know what the circumstances would be, but now we've seen it, like going to steal the time machine. And it's like, how this is all going to play out. Like, are they going to do it before they have to go on a mission, or are they going to use a mission as an excuse? Like, I thought something was going to cause them, like the fact that they find out Flynn went back to that specific time and they follow him, but it's like, nope, White himself is like, yo, we got to go there. So it's like, oh, the next time Flynn's somewhere, they're like, okay, we're going to travel here first and then do that. Or basically before they get a mission, end up traveling there. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because, Wyatt's going to be pressed with that conversation like, does the ends justify the means? It's like going back in time. He says to find another way, but it's like, that means, not necessarily that he's going to go back to that specific point in time and save her, but maybe go back in time and prevent that said guy from ever being born. It's kind of the way, Flynn kind of put it in his head. And so, he hasn't really acted upon it, but now after everything that's happening, it's like meeting the guy face to face. It's just like it's all sitting inside of his head. Like, I need to do this. It's the only way I can protect my wife. It's the only way I can keep her alive. And not just her. It's also because, two other women are dead, but it's also because, it's just kind of the same reason where Flynn has his calls, and so does Wyatt. It's like, he can say it's, also to say those other two women, but obviously the main reason is because of his wife. So that's going to be interesting to see how that all. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.